we are recording, and we're going to put that online on the university's YouTube channel at a later date. So just a reminder that if you have any issues around not wanting to be seen on camera, or then just to bear that in mind. Obviously, you can keep your camera muted and your microphone muted. By default, we've got a setting where people's cameras and mics are muted anyway. But if anybody has any questions, they can feel free to put in the chat, and there will be an opportunity for questions as well. If you want to put your hand up, then we'll come to that when we get into that stage in the program. So I think with that, we're gonna just have a look today, just to remind you of what the program is. So I'm Chris Morrison. I'm the Copyright Licensing and Policy Manager at the University of Kent, and I will be starting off after we've had an introduction from Professor Richard Reece, who is our Deputy Vice Chancellor of Education Student Experience. He's also the chair of our copyright steering group. So once Richard and I have sort of kicked things off with some context setting, we're going to go to Dr. Richard Misek, who works in our School of Arts. He's a filmmaker, a documentarian, and a creative reuser, a remixer of audiovisual work. So we're going to hear some of his experiences of working with copyright and fair dealing. Alexandra Covaci and I will be talking about, well, Alex will be talking to us about digital arts, the course that she runs, and how we have engaged students on that course through games and play and copyright, dealing with copyright issues through that way. And then last but certainly by no means least, we have Dr. Ben Marsh, who is in our history school at Kent, but is perhaps more well known for the parody songs that he and his families were recording during lockdown. So we've got a really fantastic program of events, and really the focus on today, I hope if you've joined us, then you should have a fairly clear idea of what we're looking to do today, which is to celebrate fair dealing as part of Fair Dealing Week, the flexibility within copyright law that allows us to do interesting and in some cases vital work here. So I'm going to hand over to Richard, who is going to give us his official welcome to the University of Kent's event.
Hello, my name is Professor Richard Reece, Deputy Vice Chancellor for Education and Student Experience at the University of Kent, and it is my pleasure and privilege to welcome you to this copyright and fair dealing event. Copyright is often seen as a problem for academics. It perhaps is seen as restrictive or difficult to understand, and for some it may even be described as scary or boring. But it's really important that we understand copyright, the sorts of things that we can do and the sorts of things that we shouldn't do in terms of copyright, to ensure that authors are appropriately attributed and that we're able to use material to best support our students' learning. The creation of and use of copyright material is fundamental to any university, but this is not just books and journals. Of course they are very important, but all sorts of creative expressions, including cutting-edge digital initiatives. There are some incredibly important provisions in our copyright law that allow certain activities for research and education without the permission of copyright holders, many of which incorporate the concept of fair dealing. Whilst fair dealing is hard to define and there is no definition in the legislation, the University of Kent has long acknowledged how important it is in the work that we do. The principles of responsible and lawful use of copyright material have been clearly stated in our copyright policy for some time. But we have built on this by developing a copyright literacy strategy which specifically mentions fair dealing and aligns its close use to our institutional strategy. We are delighted to be hosting this event as part of the International Fair Use Fair Dealing Week. It allows us to showcase the innovative research, teaching and civic engagement undertaken by University of Kent staff and students, and demonstrates how fair dealing is integral to developing new insights, and particularly in scholarly and cultural life. So I hope that you enjoy today's activities, and I wish you the very best. Thank you.
So thank you very much to Richard for recording that introduction to us. Richard has been hugely supportive of the work that we've been doing here to try to unlock that flexibility in copyright law. So it's been a really great experience to be working with him and the rest of our steering group to work through some of these issues. So what I'm going to do now is, as I said, it's me up next to give you a sense of what we've been doing around creating a copyright literacy strategy and how this aligns with the concept of fair dealing. So we published in July of 2020 a copyright literacy strategy. So we have this document here that we developed, and we've got a number of people here listed who were included in that process. So we had a working group and really looked at this as a project to develop something that reflected not just my perspective on this as a copyright specialist, and then also not just the perspective of, say, those in our library or professional services departments, but also in conjunction with our academic colleagues and student representatives to really find something that understood how copyright law impacted on all those different people. So we're going to put some links in the chat for these so that you can have a look at those. So I've got some willing people standing by, thanks to Chris Slater, and of course my copyright literacy partner Jane is hanging around in the wings. I should have mentioned her actually at the outset, that we will be both interviewing Ben Marsh together. So what we have here, the first thing in the strategy is a vision here. So we spent some time looking at the university strategy and seeing what were the things that we could pull out from that, so that this approach was very much aligned with what the university's central mission was. So this is the vision statement, that by 2025, people working and studying at the University of Kent will feel confident in making informed decisions about using copyright material and will understand the role copyright plays in innovation and creation of new knowledge. And also that the university's approach to copyright education will support its strategic objectives by informing policy and practice. So going back to that first paragraph, one of the key things that we were trying to do in this vision is identify that copyright there's a balance in copyright law. It restricts access, but it's also there to enable access. So what we have here is that we want use of copyright material, but also understanding that copyright is something that we can use to gain value from things. And very much that links in with the balance that exists in copyright law between the restricted acts and the permitted acts. So the things where you would need permission and the things where you wouldn't necessarily need permission to use copyright material lawfully. So we've got a series of values, and the ones I've picked out here, clearly this one was very important, that staff and students are expected to behave lawfully and responsibly. But we should also be able to question assumptions about copyright law. So this is related to this idea about critical thinking. It's what we want in a university environment, not to simply accept the status quo and say, well, that's just the way it is. We're here because we want to be thinking about how we can improve things in our lives, and how we can engage with the communities that as a university we're very much involved with. Now, fair dealing is, as Richard said, specifically mentioned in these values, that the use of fair dealing and statutory copyright exceptions, so those are things that are written in the statute that say you can do certain things without the rights holder's permission, is an essential aspect of academic activity. And it's a vital supplement to the use of licensed resources. So we're not saying we want to rely on the copyright exceptions and the fair dealing exceptions instead of getting licenses to use things with permission of the rights holder. It's a supplement to that. The two things work together, and that is really one of the points of copyright law, and what it's intended to do. So the university will support its staff and students in taking advantage of these legal provisions, that is. So what I've seen for many years is in our world, sometimes these provisions are in the law, but we feel a little bit uncomfortable about whether it's okay to use them or not. So we're actually saying that the kind of support that I've been and colleagues over the years have been giving our staff and students is to say, yes, this is here to be used. So let's provide some support in that. Now that relates to the fact that if you are relying on a legal provision that provides legal use without the rights holder's permission, there will inevitably be a certain level of uncertainty and therefore potential risk that the activity you're doing could be regarded as an infringement. You could therefore be contacted by a rights holder. You may then have to deal with that. So this has been in our policy for some time, as Richard mentioned, but we're actually saying here again in the strategy about how we support people to do that. So there are a number of activities that we have in the strategy that we're looking at. And one of these, the key thing here is to create that steering group to oversee progress with the strategy and also look at, apologies for the doorbell, and also look at particular risk-based things that we need to consider, and where we are considering collectively whether fair dealing may apply to a certain area of activity. So we've had that in place for about 1.5 years now, and it's been incredibly valuable. I mean, I'm not sure where we would have been throughout this whole process of our life, all our teaching, all our research, everything that we do shifting online, without the ability to get a group together of people with different perspectives to make some decisions around copyright. We also have we had an aim to develop our copyright guidance to support staff and students, written in concise, using user experience design principles, written in concise and plain English. And I'm delighted to say that we actually, just before I got on this call, not only do we have the link to that, which is, and Chris, if you can put the link to it's in there, brilliant. So this is the link to the downloadable version of the guidance. It's a Word document. So if anybody else wants to reuse it, it's Creative Commons license, which means under a Creative Commons attribution license, so it can be adapted as long as credit is given to the University of Kent. But I also want to say a huge amount of thanks to my colleague Angela Groth-Seary, who is a user experience expert, who we worked together to come up with this language, to avoid it being full of jargon, and I think we've got something that we can really be proud of. So there's a link to that if anybody's interested in looking at, and again, it mentions fair dealing, it mentions how we do it in practice in a way that we think is really helpful and actually reflects what people are saying they needed. And there is the guidance here. So it's kent.ac.uk/copyright. Should be easy enough to remember, but it will put the link in the chat and you can have a look at that. So really, that's all I wanted to say. And to say also the strategy itself is licensed under a Creative Commons license, so it can be reused. But I would say any other institution, and we have a number of institutions that are interested in following up on this, I'm having some different conversations, it's best to go through your own process of working out what this actually means to you. What does risk management mean to you? What areas are where you're thinking about using copyright exceptions? What particular activities are you doing? How does that fit into your governance structure and all those things? So that is going to be me giving you the introduction. I'm happy to take questions, or probably put them in the chat if you've got anything. But again, also happy. Many of the people on the call today are those who regularly join us and are part of our community. But for anyone, if you can drop me a line, we're at copyright@kent.ac.uk. So that's my part. Therefore, I think I'm ready to hand over to Dr. Richard Misek, who is going to talk to us about a story of creative reuse. Richard, are you there?
Yeah, I'm down here.
Excellent. And do you have all the necessary permissions to show us all the things you've got, all the goodies you've got lined up?
Yeah, let me share my screen, and I think I'll be good to go.
Oh, there it is.
Yep. Brilliant.
Okay, not sure about the sound yet because we haven't played anything, but we'll let you know if that isn't working. But over to you, the floor is yours.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Chris, for inviting me to this. So I'm going to divide this talk into 4 sections. I'm going to begin just by providing a bit of personal background to my own work. Then I'm going to feed this into talking about how filmmakers, or at least how documentary filmmakers, have worked with fair dealing and fair use over the last 10 years or so. And a quick proviso: I'm going to talk about fair use and fair dealing interchangeably, not because they're the same. There are significant differences between them, but because for any filmmaker or video maker who works online, both apply. A lot of things that I make, for example, go up onto YouTube and Vimeo, and the criteria for whether that is allowed online or not tend to be fair use rather than fair dealing, because they're American platforms. But when I show things in cinemas, for example, in the UK, obviously fair dealing pertains, but the two are distinct, so I'm just going to package them together. Then thirdly, I'm going to very briefly trace the creative reuse path of one of my projects in particular, and kind of point through the various stages of creative reuse that have gone through it. And then, if there's time, which there may not be, I'm going to respond to Chris's invitation to be able to approach copyright from a critical perspective by finishing with a couple of issues where I feel that perhaps fair dealing and fair use don't quite work, or don't quite do what documentary filmmakers might need them to do. So step 1, there we go. So I'm Richard Misek. I'm an academic and filmmaker. I use creative reuse a lot. I started off as a video editor initially, and then did a PhD in film studies, and then about 12 years ago became a lecturer in film. And as I became a lecturer, I started to bring together these 2 strands: my interest as an academic in film and my production expertise. And I did that by making films and video essays, sort of films or videos about film that use the techniques of filmmaking to analyze the subjects. And I regard myself as a video essayist, among other things now. And video essays basically use clips from films, re-edited with a voiceover added on top, or overlaid text, or other kind of changes. So now I teach film, I think about film, I write about film, I make films. The films that I make are also about film, so creative reuse is a sort of a constant in the inside of my head. I'm just going to show you a trailer for one feature-length documentary that I made about 8 years ago, to give you a sense of what I do. Hope you can hear the sound.
No sound, I'm afraid, Richard.
No sound.
No sound. I think
that pains
you
me.
may have to reshare, clicking that button across. I'm really sorry.
Yeah. Let me try. Okay. Share content. Include computer sound. I can't believe it. And I have to install an add-on. No.
I did this yesterday. I think it's Mac users, isn't it? See, if
well,
you're posers like us have to go through extra steps to use Microsoft stuff, unfortunately.
This will only take a few seconds.
Just a few seconds.
Couldn't install driver. Make sure you're using. Oh, okay. I'm going to improvise and just move on to my next thing.
If you, I mean, I can have a go at playing something for you, Richard, if you can appreciate you're in the middle of doing this, but I can probably share it for you if you could get it over to me.
I think it's no disaster.
Okay.
I can just talk. I've got a couple of video clips. I'll just talk over them. They'll be a bit less atmospheric, but there'll be no difference. Okay. So this is a film I made in 2014 called Romer in Paris. It's a feature-length remix documentary. And at the time, I just made it, I felt compelled to do it. I did it, didn't really think about the implications of it. And as soon as it was finished, I realized copyright might be an issue, and I panicked. I was in terror. I wrote, it was all based around footage by one particular filmmaker, Eric Romer. So I spent about 2 months drafting a perfectly phrased letter to his production company in Paris, got somebody to translate it into French, sent it off to them, politely asking if I could have permission to use the footage, and of course got no answer back. So then again, I was terrified for another few months, but film festival invitations started to come. So it started to be shown in cinemas. And after a while, I realized nothing was happening. Nobody was coming after me. The film was screening and life was going on. And around about this time, I also found out about fair dealing and realized that my film was in fact almost certainly legal. It almost perfectly encapsulates the criticism and review copyright exception. Every line of voiceover in my film was directly focused on critiquing the images that were playing in it. And so since this time, I've used fair dealing in all of my work. And I would say, fair dealing has, in short, allowed me to do what I do. Without it, I couldn't make these films, full stop. And my own kind of interest in fair dealing, my own evolution as a filmmaker has sort of paralleled the broader sector. Over the last 15 years, reuse of media has become central to documentary filmmaking. So the poster I'm showing you now is for a film called Los Angeles Plays Itself, which was made in 2003. Not to be confused with a film called LA Plays Itself, which is a gay porn film from the early 1970s, which Los Angeles Plays Itself riffs on. So Los Angeles Plays Itself is one of the great documentaries of the 21st century. And it's made entirely from found footage and entirely without permission. And at the time that it was made, the filmmaker Tom Anderson effectively showed it at a few film festivals and at a couple of cinematheques and museums and nowhere else. And in about 2004, it just disappeared. And it remained disappeared for about 10 years because the filmmaker was scared of being sued. In response to the experience of Tom Anderson, but many other filmmakers working in the early 2000s, in 2005, two academics at the American University in Washington, Wojtek Jazy and Patricia Aufderheide, interviewed hundreds of documentary filmmakers, and from that gathered a statement of best practices about how documentary filmmakers make use of fair dealing, or actually fair use, because this was America. And it turned out that using short bits of clips was regarded by almost all as a acceptable standard practice in documentary filmmaking. And as a result of this document, filmmakers gradually became more confident in making use of fair use in the United States. And they were helped by lawyers who, because of this declaration, were willing to declare that a film was fair use based on their interpretation of fair use and on this best practice code. And this also spread to the UK. So the first film that I know of, which was made entirely from found footage and entirely on the basis of fair use, was The Story of Film by Mark Cousins in 2011, which featured thousands of film clips. It would have been impossible to license these. And so he lent on fair dealing and successfully did so. It wasn't in any way contested by anyone at all at any stage. And so, in fact, by the time I made Romer in Paris in 2013, I was fine, though I didn't yet know it. And so fast forward another 6 or 7 years, and now documentary filmmakers, video essayists are using found footage all over the place. Fair use and fair dealing are very well established. Even high budget major broadcast projects use it. This is Voir, which was a series of video essays made by Netflix and released on Netflix a few months ago. entirely made entirely out of found footage clips and absolutely depending on fair use. And as a footnote to this, Los Angeles Plays was itself released commercially in 2017 as a DVD and Blu-ray and made available for streaming on Apple by Tom Anderson. And so about 15 years after he made his film, he was finally able to make an income from it. And within my own field of more academic video essaying, the same thing has happened. There's been writing about it, discourse, conversation about what constitutes best practice within the academic video essay community. There's been a book in which there are a few chapters which focus on fair use and fair dealing. It's this book by Christian Keithley, Jason Mittell, and Catherine Grant. And there's still, there's still a long way to go in widening understanding about how fair use and fair dealing can be used by academics, by students, by filmmakers. But I think thanks to copyright education work by people like Yazi and Afterhide, and of course, Chris and Jane and many others like them, I think filmmakers now live in a world where we don't need to be scared to do what we need to do. So I'll just follow up with a short kind of creative reuse path of one of my own projects. So this is a film called In Praise of Blur. I'm going to show a bit of it. It's going to be silent. Can you hear that? No.
No, it's silent. I could play a bit of honky tonk piano if you like, but
yeah,
no.
It's really okay. So it's like audio description. That's fine. I've been researching this. So it's like low key mood music, little bit experimental. It's a collage of clips from films, interspersed with text. You can see kind of slightly remix, kind of collage style. This is classic clip criticism and review. It sort of reflects on the images by showing them. This was made in 2017. So by this time I was pretty confident in my fair dealing rights, and justifiably so. I never had any problem. I put this on YouTube and on Vimeo. Never had any difficulties with it. And then about a couple of years later, in 2018, I started work on a VR project, which I'll show you a clip of here. Again, no sound, but that's fine actually, because the sound on this was going to be muted anyway. And so with a couple of other creators who had also previously made video essays, I turned this into an immersive experience. So what you're seeing here is the video essay inside a VR environment, which is a sort of a virtual cinema, and this is playing on the screen inside the virtual cinema. And what's happening over the period of about 10 minutes, which is how long my episode was, is that the screen is sort of imperceptibly coming closer towards you until it's it's sort of enveloping you, and you can actually stretch out your hands and touch it and engage with it. And so the screen becomes a kind of a tactile, kinesthetic, haptic form of engagement. So here we have a user playing with my episode. Then, as well as a VR experience, we turned it into a on-site performance. And so this is another user engaging with my episode, which is sort of the screen within the. So you have the screen, the wobbly thing is the screen enveloping the user, and on that screen is In Praise of Blur, and this is the screen in a physical theatre, obviously, in which the user is taking part in it, and there are 100 other people sitting in the rows listening to this live performance. So there's a lot of moving around here. So this happened at Sundance in 2020 of January. Immediately following this, of course, everything closed down. So we did one more iteration of this for Melbourne Film Festival last spring, where we did it as an empty cinema live stream. And we found a beautiful cinema called the Astor in Melbourne, which is a 1920s Art Deco cinema. And we put an individual VR user into it and did a live stream where there was one seat occupied and 1,000 seats empty, kind of classic, pandemic type artwork. And then just to cap this off, I noticed a couple of months ago that somebody had actually remixed my video essay. And it's a really shame I can't play the sound here, because he actually used a track from Blur, the band Blur, and it's a very blurry sounding track. Yeah, so it kind of looks quite similar. It sounds very different, and he's attached his own images to it. It's incredibly loud in my headphones, though you can't hear anything, so I'll stop that right there. Okay, so I suppose just in the last few minutes of my talk, I'd like to kind of raise a couple of issues, and I'm in the context of us being here celebrating fair dealing and fair use, I'm fully supportive of that. I also celebrate it. But there are inadequacies to copyright, which fair use and fair dealing, to my mind, don't fully address. And in particular, I think they don't diffuse the dangers of what Yazi and Aufderheide call the ongoing trend towards long and strong copyright. So I have three particular questions, concerns around how I feel that my ability to make use of fair dealing and fair use is curtailed. The first one is the commodification of intellectual property. I tried to ask Eric Romer's production company for permission to use his clips for my film Romer in Paris, but actually it was a fool's errand, because they didn't even own the copyright. They had sold the copyright on to Canal Plus about 10 years ago, and now the copyright holds in multiple hands. It's been traded between corporations. And so when I put Romer in Paris up on YouTube a few years ago, it immediately went down. And then the copyright ownership shifted a bit and it went back up. And then somebody bought something and some passed it on to somebody else, and it went down again. And in the last 5 years, it's been up and down so many times, I can't even count. Sometimes it's available, sometimes it's got an infringement claim made against it. It happens, I could contest them, but it happens so often, there's not even any point. It would be just too tiring. And so that is one issue, I suppose, the issue of copyright hawking. Fair use doesn't in itself, protect you from people going sort of, from automated content ID claims, which perhaps don't quite understand fair use and fair dealing, or don't take account for it as much as they should. Another issue, I think, is exclusivity, and that's around where copyright is based on single ownership. And even if the copyright of clips, in Romer in Paris were not abused in the way that it has been by whoever owns them, copyright just wouldn't quite work for the kind of things that I do, because constant transformation, like in Praise of Blur, problematizes the idea of a single owner of a work. Who owns the distorted images of movies that come from my video essay, that exist in a VR space, that are being watched in a physical cinema in Australia? Do I own them? Do the original owners own them? I mean, the answer is it can't be the original owners, but it also shouldn't be entirely me. There's a certain sense of shared ownership over content that copyright simply can't address, or doesn't address. It doesn't reflect the reality of creative reuse. And finally, there's the issue of inaccessibility. And that is that even though I have the legal right of fair use and fair dealing, I have no legal right to rip Blu-rays or to torrent videos. And there's a big grey area around how actually do I source this content that I am legally allowed to use. And especially in the context where there is ever stronger digital rights management, ever more paywalling. I wonder if at the moment I'm actually living in a golden age, which may very abruptly come to an end at some point in the near future. Once I don't know, blockchain technology takes over or something. Fair dealing may remain on statute books for a long time to come, but will the opportunities to utilize it shrink over time? And so I think I'm conscious my time is coming up. So I actually had a 3-minute clip to show, so that wouldn't have worked anyway. But I'll just finish by saying that my current project is a film called A History of the World According to Getty Images, and it focuses on how content that is or should be legally available is typically hidden behind paywalls by commercial archives and rights holders, and even people sometimes who aren't rights holders, but who just have ownership or have control over a particular video asset. And I think the issue of where you get this stuff from that you are theoretically allowed to reuse has been a constant throughout the last 10 years. And it's no closer to being resolved now than it was at the beginning when fair dealing started to be used by filmmakers. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Richard. I mean, it's just fascinating. I know we could talk. I mean, there are a number of questions coming through that are really would be great to talk about. I think with the time we're going to need to move on. Perhaps you can.
I'm sorry, this isn't really not much of a conclusion there. Just stop.
Well, I think the only thing I would comment, there's a question from Priya about fair use versus fair dealing. I think Claire's comment about the post DSM, just to clarify, jargon busting digital single market directive, the latest EU legislation, which is looking to change the way in which online platforms like YouTube work to sort of scan things and filter them before they go on. I think that's referring to what you're saying is this the golden age where everything gets locked down afterwards? So I think we're going to have to move on, Richard, but I just want to say thank you so much, and also watch this space, because I've seen some of the emerging stuff that's coming from your public domain Getty Images work, and it's really, to a copyright geek, it's really exciting to see you kind of really getting creative about some of those issues that we definitely see are there with the structure of copyright law. So thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
So without further ado, Alex, you are up next to talk to us about digital arts and what you've been doing and how we've been collaborating together to work with your students. So the floor is yours.
Hi, Chris, and hello, everyone. Let me try to share my presentation. It's hard to present something after, Richard's presentation, which is great, very inspiring. And I totally resonated with some of the terror he mentioned while thinking about the project. So, yeah, but now let's talk about things from a digital arts student's perspective. I hope. So I did the trick that you told me about, but I'm not sure. Okay, anyway, we'll see how it goes. So hello, I'm Alexandra Covaci. I'm a lecturer in digital art and technology at the University of Kent. And today I will give you a brief presentation about some of the projects of our students, hinting to the challenges, but also the opportunities that might be provided by copyright to digital artists. Our students are usually working in a wide variety of areas. So they are looking into their projects are on motion graphics, 3D production, online design, immersive technologies, virtual reality, and so on. So in all these projects, I'm changing the slide. Okay, in all these projects, they are that's why I'm saying that it's not my last version of the slide, because initially this was here, but I'm not sure what happened with this sharing thing. Anyway, I'll try to present it in this order now if I have it like this. So in all these projects, they are approaching different areas. These are some of the screenshots, some screenshots of the areas they are usually working in. So games, motion graphics, virtual reality, as I already said. And once they graduate, they switch. They go to they get jobs in companies such as BBC, ITV, Nintendo, Pixar. In areas such as 3D production and animation, games design, interaction design, virtual and augmented reality. And some of them even stay in research. But what I think it's important is that whatever path they take, they keep bumping into these copyright issues. So what we try to do with Chris, and what we will be talking about soon, is how we try to educate students into copyright and into how to deal with this. Now, to give you more context about the type of projects our students get involved in, I put together 3 examples, and these examples are showing, different aspects of copyright that students in our degree are usually, they usually need to consider. One of them is WAVES. So WAVES is an international collaboration between our school and NTU Singapore, where what we want is to create a connection between our students and students in the school, and we want to use art to basically erase boundaries, geographical boundaries, to unite cultures, and to bridge this distance between the 2 schools, and to give this idea that art doesn't have any specific boundaries, or art can actually unite people. And our students in Singapore, they produce audiovisual works that are usually projected, displayed on the Gulbenkian facade, and also in Singapore and Media Art Nexus. And what I prepare now is just I will show a short promotional video of this. Which is presenting, the types of work that are usually displayed for this event. I hope that the audio will be available too.
Audio is good.
Okay, so for this project, for instance, they need to think about what sort of video they can include in this artworks, and how to go about music. So this is one of the challenges they usually need to find a solution to. Then our students also work often with clients. This can be companies such as BBC. And this project that I want to present now was completed by some of our final year students who produced an animation to promote mental health awareness. And it was very well received. It even got a BBC Ruby Award in 2018. And again, when working on this animation, they had to consider various aspects related to the information that they could actually display on the animation, to the content that had to meet certain rules, and so on. So the video is 4 minutes long, or actually I have a short version of it, which is 2 minutes, but I will just show part of it. And last but not least, the last project I want to talk about is Tingbao, which is a project our students worked with together with Richard Navarro, who is a singer, songwriter, and composer based in Canterbury. The story behind it is that Richard worked on a project, on an album, which was telling a story of Tingbao, the main character, who was guided through the memories of his life by a dragonfly. And because of this storytelling component of his album, and because each of the songs were constituting a memory of Tingbao's life, we thought that this can be very well suited for a virtual reality application that can illustrate some of these memories. So therefore, one of our final year students worked together with Richard in putting this together. And of course, this had some other implications related to how do we actually split the copyright between different creators. I'll show you again just 1 minute out of this.
I think we got some buffering issues here, Alex.
Okay. So then I will not. I will stop playing. But
Okay.
I think that you understood what this is about. So yeah, whenever our students are working on a project, if it's their idea or if it's in collaboration with someone else, we run into a lot of questions, and usually the person we go to support us with all these questions and to provide us answers into how to approach different problems is Chris. And because he developed a copyright card game, we thought that this would be a very good fit for our students. So therefore, we decided to organize a set of workshops, and we organized them for 3 years now in a row with our students, with our second year students, in order to introduce them to different aspects related to copyright. And now I'll pass the discussion to you, Chris.
Thank you, Alex. I think it's just fantastic to see all the creativity, all those really diverse and interesting things that the students at Kent have been doing. What I'm going to do, we're going to do a little bit in the time we have left of playing a little bit of Copyright the Card Game, but a short, very short segment. So for those of you who haven't seen Copyright the Card Game, the link in the chat will open up the PDF, the digital PDF. So we've done this face to face is much better, but we have got an online version. We did do that, didn't we, Alex? Last year, that was quite chaotic. That was when we were just trying to get handle on how Teams worked. But nevertheless, what we do is we work through with the students, give them scenarios about things that they might need to encounter or will likely encounter in their work. So I'm going to take over sharing the screen. So I would say, have a look at the card. Just this is for background information. I know a lot of the names on the call are very familiar with copyright anyway, so I'm going to then ask you to do something that we ask our students to do, but based on I'm going to click the include computer sound, and it's working for me. So hopefully this will work for you, that you can see Music Through the Eyes by Mariana Capria, who's one of the digital arts students previously that I spoke to and has worked through some of the issues. I'm going to skip forward to the bit that's got the copyright implications, give you a bit of an idea of what this is about.
I'm not sure you have shared with sound, but maybe it's not relevant anyway.
No sound. What she's saying is that art and music go together. So these are a series of images. Let's skip forward through it. You can see art through the ages. Now, all of this stuff is, I think as most people know, public domain. But then as we go through, we get through to the 20th century, we get through to contemporary or modern artworks. So one of the key things I said to Mariana when she spoke to me, make sure whatever you do, you add your acknowledgements. So here's the first thing for all the copyright geeks out there. Out of all of these artists, one of them is still in copyright. So the first person to put in the chat who out of these master artists whose work is still in copyright. And then the next thing I'm going to ask you to do is, you've seen that what she's doing is that you haven't really been able to see it as well as I would have liked, but nevertheless you get the idea of what she's trying to do, is have a look at the following Google form that I have I'm just about to put in the chat. Oh, actually, Chris, can you put the Google form in the chat, if you mind? Chris Slater, waiting in the wings, should be able to share that just while I'm sharing the screen. It's temporarily disappeared. And what we'd like you to do is have a look. If you, I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. Oh, actually, no, I can't really stop sharing the screen because you won't be able to see who it is. Has anyone come up with the...
Yes, there are some answers.
There are some answers in there.
The first one is Kandinsky, then Matisse, and then Picasso.
Right. Okay. Can you remember what the answer is, Alex? We keep forgetting this and getting it wrong, don't we?
I think the answer is Matisse.
It's Matisse, who died in 1954. 1954. So still within the 70 years of artistic works. So the I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. I don't think we'll wait. The form is there. So if you click on the form, you will have a chance to put your vote in. So it's not a team discussion like we would normally do in the sessions with the students. For you all individually, and we will collate the answers at the end. So we'll get to see whether you agree that it's fair dealing or not. And then it's a risk assessment. So the 0 to 5, how risky is that to do what Mariana has done in the way that she's done it? So I think we're going to leave you with that. But Alex, I think it's just, for me, been a really fascinating experience talking with your students, and actually being able to be in the same room with them last week was, it was a joy. And they have so many questions. I mean, the thing is that copyright and intellectual property rights are so important for what they're trying to do artistically and what they're trying to do for their careers. And I think it really gives a great space to talk about that, both critically, but also, not just seeing it as a series of rules that simply have to be accepted.
Yes, totally. And I think that they really enjoyed the session too. And now they are very aware of this. I told you that one of them is working on a piece, on a mixed reality piece for that can go with Björk's Aurora song. So now he's worrying a lot about, the copyright, if he can actually use it, trying to approach a production house of Björk to inquire whether he can use the piece and so on. So for sure, your workshop has resonated with them, and they learned something out of that.
It's great, thanks. And just a final point in terms of the technicalities, what we haven't been doing, I've given you the form to have a look at, the copyright card game. There are a number of different copyright exceptions which incorporate fair dealing. So just to say that when it comes to illustration for instruction, section 32 of the Copyright Designs and Patents Act, the topic of my dissertation, now that allows for use when you are studying, if you're learning something, if you're putting in an assignment. But if you then go out and take that work out into either festivals or conferences, or you want somehow to get an external audience which is not purely related to your educational studies, then that might not apply to the same extent, and then you're looking at quotation or other things. So it's really interesting to work through that with the students. So Jane's just put in there, if you haven't come across it before, Copyright the Card Game is available online, download and reuse. as under related comments. Diane, illustration for instruction can't be used commercially either. It does say for non-commercial purposes. Absolutely correct. So on that note, Alex, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your students' work. What we'll do, I think, is compile links to all of those documents so that everyone can look at them, so we're not doing all the kind of tinily chopped up bits. But yeah, thank you again, and for the opportunity to work with your students, and for talking to us today.
Thank you, Chris. And I'm sorry, at some point I was a bit nervous because my slides were not in the correct order, so I was trying to come back in my presenting mode, and there was a bit of distraction.
It was fantastic. It was
okay.
Fantastic. So thank you very much. Okay, so Alex, thank you. We're going to move on to our next speaker. So before I introduce you to the person we're interviewing, I can ask. Oh, here we go. Ben and hopefully Jane are there. Good afternoon to both of you.
Hello.
Hi.
Good afternoon. Good evening.
Nice to see you.
So many of you will be aware of both Jane and Ben, but just as a brief reminder, Jane is my copyright literacy partner in crime. She and I develop the playful resources, and we bang on about copyright literacy to anyone who's prepared to withstand the onslaught of non-stop babble that we talk about copyright. And we were lucky enough to persuade Dr. Ben Marsh, Ben here, to talk to us last year for our Copyright Waffle podcast. So where we talk to people about copyright, or people whose lives have been touched by copyright. And Ben, we asked you about your story. So I guess if you just give us a very brief potted thing about how you came to get involved in copyright, and then we're going to sort of ask you some follow-up questions.
Sure. And let me start by saying I feel very much in a sort of imposter syndrome in this session. It was wonderful, and really annoyed that we didn't have a chance to hear more of Richard's stuff and see more of Alex's amazing student projects. They looked incredible, and the game. Imposter, because actually a lot of the angst to do with copyright that's come at my life in the last 2 years has had nothing to do with actual sort of direct work stuff. I'm a Commonwealth Garden historian in the School of History, working on empire and slavery and Atlantic colonialism. And so the usual kind of light touch copyright issues to do with illustrations and maps and bits and bobs here and there. But during the pandemic, we shared some songs, and they went crazy and they went viral. So we ended up on a very unprepared for a kind of journey in the midst of the pandemic. Initially, sort of material that we would all typically share, I guess, on on WhatsApp and on Facebook. But increasingly, this became writing new lyrics to parody songs that we would deliver as a family, and trying to make sure that we've been operating appropriately and in control of that journey. Has been a real challenge, and it's been really interesting. It's been absolutely exhausting at times, and we almost, when everybody thought the pandemic was finishing this summer, we really felt we were sort of a fork in the road. But I think that was a couple of months after we spoke on the copyright waffling. So one of the reasons that was a particularly interesting moment, I think, which was in February last year, is that we released a cover version that was a parody or a satire, depending on how one defines these complicated grey areas. We wrote new words to Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah, and it was called Have the New Jab, to encourage people in what then was a very new moment for vaccinations. I know we're all much more used to everything to do with vaccinations now. And there was a controversy about that because it disappeared from YouTube where it had been uploaded. And there were question marks about why this had happened, and it ended up in a set of slightly frantic negotiations and conversations with music labels, wonderful advice from colleagues like Chris, and there've been some wonderful people that I think we've all spoken to. You've spoken to on the podcast as well since then, that have sort of supported us. But we've had to try to figure out this world from the bottom up, and that's been quite a weird experience, and I don't think we've got there yet. But I think that's why I'm here. Chris can tell me otherwise.
That's definitely why you're here. Yeah.
It does sound about right. I wonder whether we should just have a short blast of the fabulous Marsh family performance before we get stuck in, just to remind ourselves.
Are you expecting Ben to call them all in the room now?
I am.
That's not going to happen. Two of them haven't had tea yet. It's very, very
exactly.
unwise.
There you go.
No, I think he's got a clip queued up, haven't you?
It's family life mixed with superstar sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Diva activities, I'm guessing. Right, I've clicked the include computer sound thing. Let's hope the gremlins get this to work.
Let's just let them run amok. We're not ready for these schoolboys, cause they just don't give a fuck.
What can I bring? See our mummy side, clapping for the NHS to make them cry. Here's a little walk, there's a little ride. Sunshine is a bummer when we're talking time.
Okay, I'm gonna pause that so we can get cracking with our chat. I think that's the thing we all remember, though, isn't it?
Absolutely. And Ben, you were just mentioning when we chatted to you on our podcast, you'd just gone through this saga, hadn't you, related to your Leonard Cohen Hallelujah song going up on YouTube, then coming down and everything. So I don't know. I mean, what the upshot of that were, if you could just maybe just briefly tell us a little bit about, how that got resolved in the end.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so the song that we just heard actually is an enduring piece of sadness that I carry, and a decision I made that was wrong because I didn't have guidance and didn't know at the time, and was pressurized at the moment of kind of there was no news, so everybody was desperate for a kind of good news story, and this was kind of funny, and there was no comedy on television, and Netflix hadn't really got going, all that stuff at the start of the pandemic. It's hard to remember now. I was effectively pressurized, sadly, to sign away those, so I no longer own those lyrics, which will always be special to us and to me. But in the circumstance of kind of international coverage, those ones disappeared. The situation with Have the New Jab is that Sony switched, who own and administer the rights to the song, switched eventually with some input actually from Department of Digital Culture. I always get it wrong now because they changed it to DCMS.
Yeah.
So there was some fairly high kind of profile scrambling because I think there was recognition that this was a message that needed to come. We all know what government communications can be like at the best of times, let alone recently. So anything that was coming that was helping to push this message was recognised to be very, very useful. Actually, that wasn't necessarily coming, from Chris Whitty and so on. So I think that probably played a part, and there was a speedy response. And with the benefit of hindsight now, having been through this process many, many times, of desperately approaching rights holders to ask for permission or to try and secure a license, and most of the time failing to get a response or failing to kind of secure formal approval. In this case, it went from being, if you like, blacklisted to being whitelisted very quickly. There's still no sense of resolution, despite questions having been asked about kind of formalizing that situation or being able to own or release the track. So it's still in a weird kind of grey zone, I think, where it's available for everyone to see, which is great, which is what we most wanted. And it's had, I can't remember, like 2 million views. It's been shared. It's done the work that we hoped it might do. It's also been shared illegally because we get notifications because it's on our channel, so we kind of get to see over the other side of the wall here as well, and it's been shared, and we've had horrific abuses, but to be expected abuse, what you're getting into above the parapet from very emotional and angry anti-vaxxers globally. I think especially in the US, but effectively, if we'd wanted to, we could have kind of followed the YouTube mechanisms and tried to shut down every fire that we could see burning when our video to which we own the rights was being shared in these other places. So that song was a kind of there's still not a sense of resolution to it, but it's available, which is part of the fight if you're not trying to monetize anything So that, yeah, there's lots of interesting dynamics that rumble on with that one.
Okay, so what you found yourself pitched into this system where you've got to now is not the ideal, and it's not clear. It's kind of bit what you want, but not quite what you want. And I think when we spoke on the podcast interview, you were talking about the technical process that you get with YouTube and Content ID, and it does the algorithmic matching of content against a database, and then something just happens and it's a policy somewhere set in the settings about what a rights holder wants to do with particular uses of their material. And you were following up, and you mentioned other people we spoke to Julia Rader, who was a former MEP, I know, that had got in touch with you because she's a big campaigner for copyright reform, and I think Jim Killock of the Open Rights Group as well. So I guess this is an event where we're looking at fair dealing. How far have you wanted to go with championing fair dealing or fair use? It sounds a little bit like, in some ways, you're kind of dealing pragmatically with the system, and you do go to get permission for things. But is it been something you've thought since then? Maybe I do want to make a stand about the right to make a parody, to make this kind of social cultural expression.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think there's an irony lurking in all of this to do with that fork in the roads that I spoke about, which is us deciding in the summer to try and take it seriously. And there's a kind of opportunity there. We love doing it. We've gained a bit of profile. We've ended up with, like, sort of accidentally, without ever asking anyone to subscribe, but with 100,000 subscribers, and thinking with kids, and you never know what's going to happen in the higher education sector or anywhere else at the moment. So we kind of thought, well, we've constituted ourselves as a company for now. It's very small fry, but we've sort of started to build a bit of a team and to feel a bit more confident about what we do, because we've done it so often. I mean, it's a company in which the shareholders who are the kids, who are frequently threatening to mutiny and remove the directors, and it's not a stable. But because you can, and now we've released our own work, you can kind of start to see it from the other perspective as well, I think, which is interesting, because we've got material there, and I think because of where our journey came from, I'm always going to be very passionate about giving people the opportunity to use that work and to bring their own ideas to it. But it's so clear that where the problems are with these big organizations, these big structures and systems, and some of them are automated and some of them aren't automated, but they just block. They kind of sit there, and I think, having looked through the document which you shared, which was I was leafing through, and you having invited us at the start of this session, Chris, to question assumptions. One of the lines there that I noticed was, there are times when licenses are unavailable or inappropriate. But in our case, it's not that they're not available or not that they're not inappropriate. They're perfect. A sync license for this or a lyric adaptation for that. It's that you can't get a response. It's the equivalent of being aired by the kids when you're telling them to get off the Xbox, or just it's that silence is really difficult to wrestle with, and it's sort of exhausting, because you can't move forward. In that chat that we've got, this idea that you're kind of guilty, you're guilty until you can prove that you're not, and it's very inhibiting. And there's no doubt that, because we get hundreds of messages from through emails, that there are thousands of people out there who are being inhibited by these processes from being musical, or from messing around with lyrics and putting their own stuff up, because they're frightened. And that's really it's horrendous when you think about the amount of sort of person hours that might have been invested in material that could be invigorating and sort of connective. So one of the things that happened with us, which was this: somebody unauthorizedly took our material, which is a little Christmas song that we wrote, and this was in Madison, Wisconsin, and they had a kind of light show on their house, and they arranged it so the lights, the kind of stuff that Howard Griffin does at Kent, the kind of light choreography to the music, and it was just fabulous, and it was so lovely to find that had happened.
We have
I think we might have a clip of that.
We've got a clip queued up. Yeah. Oh yes. So I probably shared it without sound, haven't I? Right, let's go. Why, Microsoft, can you not make it so that it shares the window with the sound by default? Anyway, that's for me to pick up with them later. Here we go.
Brindle the power went off when the lightning struck. We endlessly waited and watched as supplies burnt up. It was some kind of madness at the center, never reaching the end of a sentence that no one deserved after all. Bring us a candle.
Okay. I think we've got a little bit of interference on the background. It seems to be in time to the music, but I think the main thing for me is it's seeing Christmas stuff outside of the Christmas period. It makes me go a bit funny. But that, I mean, just listening, I mean, it's such a beautiful performance. You are so, I mean, as a family, obviously you're very musical, but it's just lovely. The combination of everything that you do is great. But yeah, to see it in that context is an interesting one to, you know, for you, you know, it's always that thing that we say when we're talking about fair dealing is like, how would you feel if someone did the same thing with your stuff? So, yeah. I mean, your feeling of this was you were pleased, is what you're saying.
Yeah, without a doubt. And you know, I think one of the things that I've learned to do is look much more closely and think much more closely about descriptor text that goes with. I'm always interested in how other people navigate these issues now, because there's so much kind of illegal stuff that's up there, and because we've now been through the process and we've got a music lawyer that we will use as few hours as humanly possible on the basis of current experience. But as I say, we've got a bit more conviction, we've got a bit more kind of sense of understanding. So I'm always really intrigued by looking at what other people are doing online and how much time and energy is invested in attempts to kind of ask the right questions and to think about what they're delivering and whether it's legitimate and whether they feel that they're protected by fair use or fair, whether that language or the language of, you know, satire or parody crops up and in different circumstances as well, because obviously there are these different international emphases and definitions, and there are semantics about it as well, right? Because there's a kind of new language that feels like it's emerging that to me, that as a layman, that isn't reflected in some of the kind of technical discussions. But for instance, the language of re-lyricking that I've seen over and over again now, that was particularly kind of inflamed, I think, by the pandemic and by where we've got to with digital technology. But there's loads of duff advice that's being offered that's not kind of legally accurate, basically, but that constitutes people grappling with these sorts of questions about what's legitimate and what's not, and thinking it makes a difference if you monetize or if you don't, or if you're not monetizing the song but you're selling merchandise and you're growing a commercial profile for what you do in other ways. It's very complicated.
Absolutely. Can you tell us a bit? I mean, how did your experiences of getting formal advice compare to, say, like the advice you might have got from the University of Kent's copyright advisor?
We'll put him on the spotlight.
No, I mean, I think the advice itself is probably very similar. In fact, you know, one of the frustrations is one is constantly looking for something categorical because it's so uncertain and because you feel inhibited and it's stressful, and I think we've heard that also from, you know, Alex and Richard in a way, is you're worried, you're wandering around looking for somebody to hold your hand or to kind of at least tell you can definitely do this and you definitely can't do this. But we didn't get that clarity in the way that I would have wanted to from even, you know, from there's still language like this seems like it should be all right, but it's never, you know, you never have that kind of certainty. And the only times we've had a bit of that certainty is because of certain projects that we've been working on, or certain partners. So we did, you know, we worked with Comic Relief last year and did a version of our Totally Fixed Where We Are, which was itself an adaptation of Total Eclipse of the Heart, and because it was the BBC, blanket license, big teams, kind of covered by a huge charitable event. The publishers rolled over really quick, like the responses were coming back, they were preempting things. It was just an absolute joy, and we felt really we were able to transfer that energy of kind of stress to do with copyright and fair use and so on, and what that might mean about how we needed to behave, and our sequencing of when you need to ask for things and how long a lead-in is reasonable to expect and so on. We were able to turn all that energy into like, let's try and make this a really good performance and do extra practice, you know, all the other stuff. So actually it makes a difference to you as a kind of creative, as a creative person, as an artist, because you don't have to then be compressed by all of these really awkward and uncertain kind of technical questions, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can see.
Music lawyers, I think, are particular in some ways because they're also gatekeepers and networkers, and they're part of the mystique of the system of trying to get a contract with a label or with a publisher and so on. They're not they didn't really feel independent, even though you're the client and they're very clearly working for you. It's a strange one.
I think we wanted to pick something up in relation to charity affiliations, didn't we, Chris? I don't know. Do you want to?
I think we've got
play another clip?
Should we play your latest single? Seeing as you're here on the chat show couch, we can always have another plug. I've shared it without the blinking sound again, haven't I? And it's probably going to have a little bit of the interference, so apologies for that. But we are going to see how it works out anyway. So you can tell us about why you've recorded Mac the Knife in a moment. Let's just have a brief clip.
Oh, the prostate, it's a gland, dear, and it's hidden deep inside. Has a shelf life that's hard to predate, 'cause we keep it out of sight.
Like a walnut,
Kind of T-shaped.
near the bladder and rectum. Fancy gloves, oh, where's the doctor? If they check it, sticking fingers up your...
Okay. Thought that would be a suitable clip to play.
There were big debates about all of these lyrics actually, because they were worked up in partnership in that case with Prostate Cancer UK, and whether they would mean, there was a big irony in this song, right, which is to raise awareness for Prostate Cancer UK, by the way, who've got a campaign just launched this week because 14,000 men will go undiagnosed because of the pandemic. So encourage everyone to use I'm doing my bit for Prostate Cancer UK, encourage everyone to use their 30-second checker, especially if you have males in your family 45 or above. But yeah, the could be played to talk about the prostate for instance, on the radio became an issue because words like rectum, they're not going to make it on BBC Radio 2, but there's this big irony about what the whole thing is about, to try and get people talking about something that's just a natural human phenomenon, and then are these lyrics appropriate or not? There was a different kind of threshold for writing those lyrics that had to pass muster. I thought that song would be quite straightforward, to be honest, when we looked, because there've been so many covers of it. Its words have been reworked in lots of ways as well. There's wonderful Ella Fitzgerald version where she basically forgets all the word. I don't know if that's covered, like pretending you forget the words. If that's a whole other kind of question in terms of the performance. But it turned out not to be straightforward. It turned out to be hugely complicated because there were multiple publishers, because it's 1928. It's written in German, so on the sort of official approval for this approval of the adaptation, I'm a translator of the 1928 German into kind of, it's a bad translation basically, rather than a reworked lyrics of the English translation. It's so yes.
Wow.
And so was that adaptation done with working with the publishers then and getting approval for it, or did you, in some ways, did you go, right, we're gonna do this and take the risk?
No, it's working with the publishers, but a very different experience. So as I mentioned before, BBC, blanket coverage, big teams. Most of the charities that we've worked with, they have no clue, and this isn't to disparage them. It just hasn't fallen within their remit to work on these sorts of questions. And so it was a weird one where I was sort of imparting everything I knew about exemptions and what we needed, and the whole set of different licenses, because
you became the copyright expert.
Yeah, effectively. But then they needed to liaise with because we wouldn't have got a response. So the charity liaising with the publisher gets a response, which we very rarely get. Again, there are certain publishers that have been brilliant, and one's reminded in this that, as with any set of processes, there are some people that are just better communicators or kind of understand circumstances. But I think lots of the discussions with Julia and other colleagues in the past year have been about content ID, automation, my sense of the problems in the sector, some of the difficulties are just about good communication, who takes responsibility. I see actually David's got a question in the chat about time limits. That would be so much more, it'd be so useful to have, or just an archive, a kind of log, which we're beginning to get now, aren't we, with kind of Facebook and YouTube resolution mechanisms. At least you've got like an archive. But you don't get that if you're filling out online forms with publishers, which are very variable. You sometimes don't even get copies of them. So I've learned to kind of take screenshots of everything so that I can. It's as much for myself as anything else to prove that we've done what anybody that's reasonable. I know that's not legal, but it's like the old-fashioned definition of fair. It's like what anybody would look at from the outside and say, do you know what, you tried really hard, crack on.
Exactly. I mean, it's the area we're fascinated with, and going back to what Richard was talking about, Yazi and Aufderheider's work to create community-created codes, and that's actually has an influence on how the law is interpreted. I mean, if we go back to, let's not take too long a detour into copyright history, but okay, well, let's go back to 1886. Let's go back to 1886 and the Berne Convention, where it was agreed that we wouldn't have formalities of formal registration of copyright works, and that copyright automatically passes. I mean, that goes back to 1710 and the Statute of Anne, but it's a system that was created from Enlightenment thinking, and so it moved away from this idea of registration and everything, because it was impossible to have done that at the time. That's part of the reason why they decided against it. They wanted strong protection for authors that would automatically arise, but now we're moving into this registration blockchain world in which it may be possible, and those people in the copyright world are talking about, but it's a fundamental paradigm shift, and maybe that is what's needed in order to try to help some of this stuff happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of best code of practice that Richard mentioned, and again, apologies if there is one that's out there that I just haven't come across because it's kind of not my work thing, but that sort of code, or set of protocols for music parodies would reach so many thousands of people and support them in being musical and creative, in the same way that Richard mentioned that kind of documentaries there. It would be very, very useful if there aren't plans to create it.
I think highly contentious to having come from the world of music publishing. I am pretty sure I know where that would go, but nevertheless, I think it's something that we should continue to talk about, and I think that's what we wanted to do really with this event. Is not, I mean, celebration of fair dealing, but it's also, as we were talking, as Richard was talking about, pointing out some of the challenges in the system, the things that don't work, and how might we change them. I see that Claire Kidwell's got a question. Do you obtain the permissions and licenses simply because the material gets taken down if you don't? If you're using the material on a platform where there wasn't a risk of takedown, would you be happy to rely on the parody exception?
So we always ask for permissions and licenses. There's only one time where there's been a direct request to take a song down, which we've acquiesced to, which was a parody that we did of Billy Joel's Uptown Girl that we called Lockdown World, and eventually we got a response from the publisher, and so in that instance, they'd actually asked to remove it, so that we didn't have a problem with that. But again, the information that they need often to assess the request requires you to have completely delivered a final film video if it's for kind of sync, or to have completely recorded your song, and the amount of effort that goes into doing that for most ordinary people to get to that point, and then for someone to turn around and say no, computer says no, or artist says no. And there are obviously lots of stories and examples out there. Weird Al Yankovic in this field in particular is the kind of usual one that people point to, and I'm always struck. Actually, we were playing with the possibility of a song, You're Beautiful, his kind of James Blunt's massive hit.
Oh yeah.
Which there was an issue with Weird Al Yankovic couldn't get, had James Blunt's assent originally, I think in like 2003 or 4, but Atlantic Records said no, and since then, but it was released anyway. But unless you've got that kind of might and you're willing to sort of to take that risk, I'd love for us to be in a position in a few years' time to kind of to be in a position to kind of challenge, to test that exception and what it really means. But the problem is that anyone that gets anywhere is probably so connected in different ways to the machinery and the systems that you don't dare tap against the wall, right?
I think that's an excellent note on which to say a university provides a space for experimentation, for critical thinking, for rethinking how things work. We're not currently on YouTube. This video will be put on YouTube, but I would say in the interests of looking at a number of the fair dealing exceptions, parody, caricature, pastiche obviously is the key one, but also illustration for instruction, which allows people to make teaching points as part of their education. I'm going to go ahead and take the decision that we're going to play a short clip from that video, the lockdown world, and get a feeling from others of what they think about whether this really is materially different. I'm not going to play much more because we've got the audio interference again, but there we go, a clip of that.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for joining us again to talk to us. It's been absolutely fascinating hearing more about your story as it continues to evolve, I think.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, cheers, Ben. So I think on that note, we'll move into the wrapping up. I see that there are just a comment there from Richard. So you've put in a report there about YouTube takedowns or incorrect copyright claims. And again, David Hailing, thank you for sharing that information about blockchain, the amazing solution for almost nothing. Yes, I did. When Alex and I were having a conversation about what we were going to cover in this, the subject of NFTs came up as a possible thing we might talk about. Thought, okay, we're going into a whole different area there. To me, I don't think they, well, time will tell. History will tell whether non-fungible tokens will work. So Ben, you forgot to mention the pain of when your tuning is off so the content ID doesn't recognize the song. Yes, I think we've all been there. So
Chris, is it worth us just mentioning we did have a video taken down of
Oh yes, we did. So we had the video where we were, but it was our Christmas special.
I think actually I was singing so badly I am surprised it was taken down, but
there is a whole question of moral rights as well, whether they qualifies derogatory treatment of a work and therefore impacting on the original author's creative personality. But that's perhaps for another time. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to wrap us up. I want to say thank you once again to Richard Reece for kicking us off and for providing so much support to the work we do around copyright here at Kent. Richard, thank you again. We're going to share links to your work there. It's been fascinating working with you and also working with your students on your media studies course as well, to talk to them about copyright. And I think we'll be watching this space to look at the work you're doing around the public domain, because I think it's a really fascinating provocation, and it really makes us think about how audiovisual work is such a huge part of our cultural history. Alex, thanks again for your words and demonstrations of your students' work. It's exciting to see all of the different things that are coming in. We didn't really get a chance to talk about artificial intelligence. I guess that's an area that's a real hot topic in copyright at the moment, but it's certainly something that came up last week when we were talking with your students about, how things that translate or adapt stuff and the machines are in control. And finally, thanks to Jane and to Ben for continuing that chat, and for everyone who's been involved in this, and particularly Chris Slater for working behind the scenes and making sure it's all working okay, and getting everyone to be here. So I don't think there's anything more I can say except thank you very much for coming. And looking forward to, I suppose the last thing I would say, there are some Fair Dealing Week events left. There is, I think, actually registrations for the Skirl Coffee Morning tomorrow have ended or have closed now. But those of you that are there, we hope to see you there. And yeah, we will get that recording up and let you all know when it's available. Lovely to see the thoughts.
Thank you, Chris. Very well done putting this all together. And I have to dash, but
literally, you're off running, aren't you?
I am literally, yes.
Okay,
yes.
okay.
Brilliant, though.
Brilliant.
Really great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.